So you can probably hear all the big trucks. We're down by the port of Long Beach and port of Los Angeles. We're actually going to be leaving Long Beach, and we are going to be going across a bridge and heading to an island. And that island is actually in the city of Los Angeles. All right, let's saddle up and go. So we are going to saddle up and leave the port of Long Beach area, and we are going to head to Terminal Island and then to the city of Los Angeles, actually the coastal area of the city of Los Angeles. And you'll notice that there are two bridges side by side. One is still being built. One was finished in 1968. Both are called the Gerald Desmond Bridge. Both are named after a man who grew up in Long Beach, and he went on to become city attorney, but he died 4 years before this original Gerald Desmond Bridge was completed. You can see the new bridge being constructed right there. Here's the original Gerald Desmond Bridge. The new bridge will cost about $1.5 billion. It will have a bike path, a pedestrian path, actually areas where you can stop and look out over the harbor. The old Gerald Desmond Bridge was too low for the modern container ships, and it didn't even have emergency lanes, so it really just doesn't work during this time in history. Before that bridge was used, however, there was a bridge that was built by the U.S. military during World War II. This is the old Gerald Desmond right here we're looking at. And the bridge that was built before that one was a pontoon bridge. It was only supposed to last for 6 months, ended up being used for 24 years. Pretty unsafe. Actually, 7 drivers drove off the thing and ended up dying. Before that bridge, there was a bridge built for the Ford Motor Company, which had a plant on the island. Now look right here, look at some of the construction images. Man, it's gonna be a pretty amazing place. I've enjoyed watching the bridge go up over the years and can't wait to see what's pictured here, the finished version of the bridge. But again, going way back, there was once this pontoon bridge that was pretty dangerous. And then there was the bridge that brought people onto the island to work for the Ford Motor Company. And that plant produced Model A's. My grandfather actually drove a Model A from LA to New York back in 1929. And later built Lincolns and Mercuries, and also trucks to be used for construction of the Hoover Dam and machines for World War II. But eventually the oil that was being drilled from the island left the area unsafe, and the plant started to sink and it couldn't work anymore. But we're going to go and see what's on Terminal Island now. So we're going to continue on the bridge onto Terminal Island and explore what is there. Terminal Island is located between the city of Long Beach and the community of San Pedro, which is actually part of the city of LA. It's dominated by container shipping today. You know, those containers that come in and they put them on trucks and trains to bring stuff that goes to your local Target. If you go way back to the beginning, though, it was called Rattlesnake Island. And then they added land to it from a nearby island that had to be removed. Before the containers arrived, the island was famous for the U.S. Navy activity here. They actually built ships. My dad's cousin worked on them before he joined the Marines and fought in the Second World War. Now, going way back before World War II, there was the fishing industry. The first cannery opened here in 1893. And at first, they canned sardines. People were crazy about sardines 100 years ago. Today, people find it odd that I like them. In any event, Monterey was not the only community with a cannery row. There was a cannery row right here on Terminal Island. But interest in sardines diminished, and tuna arrived. Took a while to try to sell it. Eventually, they figured out how to remove the oil, and they started calling it chicken of the sea. And chicken of the sea became one of the famous labels of the tuna that was canned here. Star-kissed tuna was another. They added their mascot, Charlie, which became very famous. Charlie's still used in their advertising today. And Star-kissed was also started right here on Terminal Island, along with a lot of other tuna canners. But it took a while to sell that stuff. Originally, tuna was thought of as garbage of the sea. But again, they figured out a way to pack it in water and take the oil out, and it started to sell better after World War I. Japanese fishermen were recruited to fish these local waters because they were the best. They had the best methods. They used a method called chumming, which was successful in bringing in the fish. And they created a place called Fish Harbor where the Japanese fishermen kept their boats. And also, Fish Harbor became their local community. So we're just exploring some of the buildings that are left over from the cannery days. We were right here at the corner of Cannery and Tuna Streets, and here's a little cafe and market that still has survived. And we're going to take a look at the longest operating cannery building on Terminal Island. It was owned by the Van Camp Company, Canning Company, and they are the ones who gave us chicken of the sea, and that's what they canned here. And this building here opened in 1943. The company can trace its roots back to 1912. They were bought out in 1997 by a company in Thailand. Once upon a time, though, the LA Harbor area led the world in tuna fishing, but overfishing and controversial government regulations drove the industry out. But the labels survive, even though the tuna now comes from other places. So now we're going to head over to Fish Harbor, where the Japanese-American fishermen once lived, and see what's left there. The village that was once located on Terminal Island, the village that was home to 3,500 Americans, is long gone. People don't live on Terminal Island these days unless they live in the federal prison that's located here. There are other people here during the day. They're here for container shipping, ships bringing in goods from different parts of Asia, or they're here for shipping businesses of other types. But most people don't get off the freeway to visit Terminal Island. And this memorial to the former residents is a little bit hard to find, but we're here. And we're here to learn, we're here to honor, we're here to remember. Executive Order 9066 was unbelievably signed by the President of the United States, and it viciously stripped away the constitutional rights of the villagers who once lived here. And the question remains, what was behind that executive order? What caused it? The best answer I can come up with is fear. Fear of one's fellow citizens due to the fact that they were of a different race, and in this case of different descent, Japanese descent. One February day in 1942, as a result of that executive order, the residents of this fishing village were given 48 hours to evacuate their homes, and then they were shipped off to prison camps. The entire village neighborhood of homes was then destroyed, razed to the ground. Many years later, in 2002, this memorial was erected. We're here to remember, we want to honor, and we want to remember in order to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. Take a moment to look at these images of the life that was once lived on Terminal Island. One of the quotes that really strikes me here is this: "But above all, we were Americans." And indeed, that's so true. We are all Americans. And this is something we just must never forget. And we must vow to never let it happen again. So we're looking out at what was Fish Harbor here, and we're going to actually be leaving Terminal Island, which is in Los Angeles, and continuing on to another part of LA City. So Fish Harbor is now right behind us, and we're looking at the edge of Terminal Island. If you can see those hills over there, that's where we're going next. It's off the island, but it's still part of the city of Los Angeles, and that is San Pedro. And we're going to go visit that next. We're going to actually take the Vincent Thomas Bridge to get there. So right behind me you see the Vincent Thomas Bridge, which was finished in 1963, and until that time you had to actually take a ferry from Terminal Island across to San Pedro on the mainland. Now, San Pedro, you might be thinking, why is he calling it Pedro? Why not Pedro? Mr. Gertson, don't you know how to pronounce Spanish words? Well, no, I do mess them up a lot. But actually, this one, I'm saying it the way the locals do. Even if you're used to speaking Spanish, if you live in that area, you call it San Pedro. People who live in San Pedro consider it to be its own city, even though technically it's part of the city of Los Angeles. You'll see LAPD, LA Fire, LA Services there. But the bridge behind me, the Vincent Thomas, which was finished in 1963, is the way we get from Terminal Island back onto the mainland at San Pedro, which is, again, city of Los Angeles, just like Terminal Island is, though, as well. Now, before that bridge was there, you used to take a ferry across, and you take a ferry from right near where I'm at over to San Pedro. When they finally put the bridge in, a lot of the people who worked at the canneries over here wanted to keep the ferry going because they said, hey, the buses don't run that late. The ferry runs all the time, but to no avail. The ferry stopped running, and the bridge is now what we use. Now, the Vincent Thomas Bridge is named after Vincent Thomas, who actually was a guy who grew up. He was a kid from Pedro, became a state assemblyman, and worked hard to get this bridge built. He actually was called the Orphan of San Pedro because he had grown up without parents on the streets of San Pedro and was kind of a success story to the people there. Technically, the Vincent Thomas Bridge is part of Highway 47, so that is a state route taking us into San Pedro, and we're going to saddle up and get on over that bridge right now. So we take the Vincent Thomas Bridge from Terminal Island into San Pedro, which is still part of the city of Los Angeles. And then we get to the bottom of the bridge here on the other side. We're going to turn left and go up harbor and see the waterfront here at the Port of Los Angeles and some of the amazing things that are here. This bridge is just absolutely gorgeous in my opinion. Very narrow bridge, but just gives you beautiful, beautiful views. And I'm looking forward to exploring the waterfront here with you. So just on the other side of the Vincent Thomas Bridge, you can see this World War II era ship behind us. That's actually the USS Iowa, and it's only been here for a couple of years. The USS Iowa now operates as a museum, temporarily closed because of the pandemic, but it was built in 1940 and spent 50 years in the fleet as an operating battleship. It hosted more presidents than any other battleship in American history. FDR was on board when another U.S. Navy warship accidentally fired a torpedo at it. Ronald Reagan was on board to celebrate the restoration of the Statue of Liberty and watch the Beach Boys perform. And George Herbert Walker Bush also was on board this ship, himself a World War II veteran. Okay, right behind me here is now the Los Angeles Maritime Museum, but that's the former ferry building right there, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about. Do you recognize the style of this building? If you guess Streamline Modern, you're right. It's the same style we saw at the Long Beach airport, as well as at a house we visited in Long Beach and at another apartment building we saw. It was built in 1941, right on the eve of World War II. It was a government-funded project, part of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration, which built so many buildings and projects in the United States at the time. The attempt was to look sleek, modern, and to evoke the ideas of travel. Ferries would dock on the back side of the building. There were two of them. One was named Islander, the other Ace. And this is how people would come and go and get to work at the canneries, the Ford automotive plant, and the shipyards on Terminal Island, because there was no bridge at that time. When the Vincent Thomas Bridge came in 1963, this building was rendered obsolete. The twin building, twin to this building that was on the other side over on Terminal Island, was destroyed, was demolished in 1972. But this ferry building is now used as the Los Angeles Maritime Museum. And it's pretty cool at that. Right next to the Los Angeles Maritime Museum is this memorial for merchant marines. And merchant marines are the people who work on our ships, civilian ships during peacetime. And in wartime, they're often called upon to assist the Navy and the government in transporting goods. And they end up getting into the war itself and end up having to fight on those ships. And during World War II, the merchant marines actually included boys less than 18 years of age sometimes, and they had a higher casualty rate than the Army, Navy, Army, Air Force, or the Marines. A local sculptor by the name of Jacob D'Ambrosi designed it, but he died before he could complete the sculpture, which was actually completed by his sons. We're walking over here to the USS Los Angeles Memorial. There have been multiple ships with that name. In fact, one of them was actually an airship, or what we call a blimp today, but the CA-135 USS Los Angeles is a ship that's honored here. And this ship was paid for by the people of Los Angeles when they realized that San Francisco had a ship in World War II and we didn't. In fact, in 1 month's time, the people of LA raised more than double what was needed, and the excess money went to other naval projects. The ship was built in Philadelphia, but it wasn't finished in time to serve during World War II, and yet its history is pretty illustrious. It went on to protect and preserve the independence of Taiwan when it was under attack by the Communist Chinese, served during the Korean War. It was recalled out of retirement multiple times by its government, and when we look at it here, we see the main mast of that ship. It was preserved by one man, Mr. Roy Coates. When that ship went to the scrapper, he actually salvaged part of it, and that became the memorial that we have here today. I hope you'll visit the Maritime Museum when it reopens and check out some of the incredible history of this ship and of our region. One of the things I love best about the Port of Los Angeles, the Pedro area, is just all the little historic gems that are overlooked and that most people don't pay attention to. For instance, this ancient warehouse building with a loading dock, not cared for. It probably will not survive, but this is fascinating to me. I imagine this building was new when my great-grandfather was working down here at the port. What's interesting is if you look closer, you can see some of the attention to detail from the era. For instance, right here, look at these columns and the dentile work up above. This is Greco-Roman architecture added to a very practical American building. I love, you can see the track still here where the trains would roll up to the loading dock. Once again, you can see the Greco-Roman architecture and this warehouse, this birth warehouse. I love it. Look it up above, and you see the water tower welcoming the ships coming into the Port of Los Angeles, and then this old warehouse, which evidences, you know, the way they would have unloaded goods and stored goods back in the early 20th century. If we look right across the way here, past the no trespassing sign, you can see the new cranes that are used to unload the ships coming in from China and Korea and the rest of Asia. Because after all, California is part of the Pacific Rim. And that's why this is the busiest port area in the United States, much busier than New York. So we're at the very edge of Pedro, right up here on the bluff, looking down at the harbor of Los Angeles and back towards Terminal Island and Long Beach way in the distance there. So if you look out just behind me, you can actually see there's an artificial breakwater out there, which creates the Port of Los Angeles. And if you look really close, you can see that there's a lighthouse there, and that's the Angels Gate Lighthouse. Once again, we're at the end of San Pedro, right here out at Point Furman. And below this hill here, which is the site of a World War II Army base, Fort MacArthur, that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But right now, we're actually going to explore just below the high bluff and go down to the very point of Point Furman. Back in the 1850s, they decided they needed a lighthouse here, but one would not be built until 1874, and that's where we're going right now. And that lighthouse was the first beacon guiding people into the Los Angeles harbor. Now, the lighthouse we showed you from the top of the bluff looking down to the harbor, that was the Angels Gate, you'll remember, which is still in operation. But this is, again, the original lighthouse at Point Fermin from 1874. So let's cross the street and go take a look. Look at these incredible trees in the park. We'll take a stop at this old bandstand first, which is much newer than the lighthouse. You can see it's built in the very popular Spanish Revival style of the early 20th century. If we look just beyond, you can see the lighthouse. And it truly looks like that, a house with a light on top. Unlike the lighter lighthouses, which the later ones looked a little more industrial, this truly does look like a house. So the horizontal siding you see there, the exposed rafter tails, this is all indicative of what we call Victorian stick style architecture. I said that a little awkwardly, but Victorian stick style architecture. If it looks familiar, it's because it's been in a lot of movies and TV shows. There were 6 of these stick style Victorian lighthouses built. There's only 3 of them left. One of them is in New Jersey, one in San Francisco, and then this one right here in the city of Los Angeles in the community of San Pedro. And right here you can see why the lighthouse is located here on Point Fermin. We're looking right out at the Pacific coast. And as we turn the corner here, we're looking towards the entrance of the harbor. Look way out there. And there it is, the artificial harbor. At the very end, the Angels Gate Lighthouse, which is an old lighthouse, but a lot newer than what we're looking at here with the original lighthouse that guarded the entrance to the LA Harbor, then the San Pedro Harbor, Point Fermin Lighthouse, 1874. We're gonna keep walking south here though, along the point, and we're gonna take a look at something interesting right down below the bluff, below the lighthouse. So you can see this area is supposed to be off limits, but there are people out walking there. This is the entrance to what has become known as Sunken City. In 1929, there was a landslide here that actually caused part of the park itself to go down. But what was most disturbing to the locals was that there actually were city streets, streetcars, streetcar lines, you name it. It was a very exclusive neighborhood, and it slid down off of the bluff down below to the ocean, and at its peak, about 11 inches per day was sliding away. So this is as close as we will get today. That entire community was lost to the sea in 1929. Right around that corner there, there's even explorers down there today, but I'm not going to take the chance of going to jail. I'm going to obey the law, and I'll stay up here on the bluff and take you to something else that's interesting. So we're going to go to the top of the bluff up here, to the site of Fort MacArthur. There's actually a little bit left from that World War II era Army Air Base. My cousin was actually stationed here, a cousin who actually was more like an uncle to me growing up. And he told me some stories. I'll share a couple of them with you here today, but let's head on up to the top of the bluff here to the site of Fort MacArthur, or what was Fort MacArthur, and is now actually a park. So here we are at the site of Fort MacArthur. And if you look at these buildings right here, these actually were army barracks, places for people to stay inexpensively, but what a location right above the ocean here. See the ocean just beyond, and this would have been where my cousin was based and where he would have lived, in this area right here. But this is now a park, and it's actually the site of perhaps my favorite outdoor basketball court. Isn't that an amazing view? And if you look on the backboards themselves, it says LA Clippers, so that makes it even nicer for me. So if we turn to the left, you can see there's a Korean friendship bell out there, and that's actually what it's called, the Korean friendship bell. And that was given to the United States on our bicentennial, our 200th birthday back in 1976 by South Korea. And there actually is a bell in there. They do ring it on July 4th. And on the bell, which you can't see today because this area is gated off, there actually is both a Korean figure and the Statue of Liberty. Maybe I'll try to sneak in a picture of my daughter and my son up here at the friendship bell back in the day. I just love this location. The lighthouse we're looking at is just below this point. Behind us is a lookout point for Fort MacArthur. All around this location, there are still gun rings for massive artillery pieces to protect the Pacific coast from potential invasion by the Japanese back in the 1940s. Now, right up there, they once looked for guns, but now that's actually used by a marine mammal organization. Uses that as a lookout point. So as I was saying, my cousin was stationed here during 1942, actually a little bit later than that, but in February of 1942, they had something take place here known as the Battle of Los Angeles. As it turns out, it maybe wasn't actually a battle, but we were sure we were under attack. And we started firing our guns at the coast, believing the Japanese were attacking us. It probably actually was, there was an accident involving a meteorological balloon, and that probably started all the firing. But there are still some people today who swear that we were under attack by the Japanese just off the coast here. Now remember, this is February of 1942, so the United States was pretty scared about being under attack, and many Americans overreacted, and that's what led to the executive order that removed those Japanese Americans from Terminal Island that very same month. Remember, February of 1942, so-called Battle of Los Angeles. It was in that hysteria, the same time period, that we took away the rights of so many Japanese Americans, or denied them their rights. I say we, I mean we, the United States of America. It's something we have to take ownership for, because in our Declaration of Independence, we swear that all men are created equal. We provide constitutional rights for everyone, and fear should never blind us so that we take away, the rights of others. But that's what happened here in February of 42. I'll tell you a little bit more about my cousin. What's really interesting is that during the same time, a Japanese sub actually did make it to the California coast and attacked it right near Santa Barbara. We're looking up at old Fort MacArthur here, and if you look at this building right here, that's actually a recreation center with a pool on the grounds of Fort MacArthur. So back to the story of my cousin Gordon. As I said, Gordon was stationed here at Fort MacArthur and served in the U.S. Army Air Forces back during World War II. But my cousin Gordon was also a resident of Los Angeles already, and when he went off to war, his family took care of the house of some of their neighbors. You see, their neighbors were Japanese American. And as we discussed down below at Terminal Island, Japanese Americans living in California were denied their rights and placed in internment camps. And this was true of their neighbors, my cousin Gordon's neighbors. And so for the remainder of the war, my cousins took care of the house that belonged to that Japanese American family. I remember talking to my cousin Gordon about this before he passed away. And my biggest takeaway from that discussion with Gordon was this. We can't control what the government does, but we can try to hold our government accountable. We can vote intelligently. We can speak out, especially on behalf of our neighbors. And when all else fails, we can actually sacrifice on behalf of our neighbors. We can simply love our neighbor. And actually, that's what we're called to do, isn't it? To love our God with everything we have and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this trip to San Pedro. We're going to saddle up and head on back to the OC, to the 714. God bless you. See you next time.